Thank you. So when I was first informed about the topic of EFL talks today, I was really excited because I actually consider myself as a digital immigrant, given that I've spent actually half of my life before this great revolution of digital technology. And so as a student, but the first years of my teaching practice, the only available technology in my classroom was just the cassette recorder and the video player. But of course, since then, things have changed a lot. And as a teacher, I have walked all the way from, find there's something, okay, so that's fine now. So I have walked all the way from the traditional blackboards to whiteboards, and then to interactive whiteboards, and more recently to augmented reality. And like most of you, with my students, I use a number of applications like Quizlet, Kahoot, and Mentimeter. And I always try to encourage my students to do online research for their projects as a way to help them develop their digital literacy. But I also make them aware of issues that have to do with their digital footprint and how these can impact their life. So I mention all these things to tell you that although I'm a digital immigrant, as I told you, I feel very respect towards this new environment that so much caters for my teaching practice. So at this point, I want to quote the ITEFL Learning Technology 6 mission statement, which makes very clear how technologies nowadays for our language learning practices and teaching in EFL community. Now, although I am aware of all these things and I appreciate technology, I have never forgotten where I start from back in the 90s. So I want to share a very vivid memory with you, and that is of the very first seminar I attended when one big publishing company actually wanted to introduce and promote one of the very first interactive whiteboard programs. So, of course, we are all very excited and fascinated of this state-of-the-art development. But what I can never forget was a very clear warning that we got by the end of this presentation. That is, if we thought that we would, from now on, we would spend the whole lesson sitting on our chairs, just moving the mouse around the screen, and that was the only thing that we had to do from now on, then our classes are doomed to fail. So that was a very clear indicator to me that yes, technology would be a wonderful aid for our teaching, but still, all the in the core of teaching is still the creativity, teachers' creativity, but also students' participation. So, of course, technology nowadays is something that is very integrated in our teaching practices. And when we think about low resourceful settings, we think of teachers who have to work under very difficult circumstances and still do their best. For example, on the internet, you can find many stories of teachers working in the middle of war zones, where all these things that we take for granted for them are just not available. They're actually a luxury. But sometimes bad things happen, and it doesn't have to be such a life-threatening situation. So, for example, last year, because of a technical problem, I had to work for weeks without interactive whiteboard. And as if that was not enough, there were also some issues with Wi-Fi connection at school. So what should I do? I knew that the whole situation was very challenging, both for me and for my students who have always worked with technology and interactive whiteboard in their EFL classroom. So there should be a way to deal with it. And then here comes my first rule for how to work in low resource for classes. So when teaching in low resource settings, just be resourceful. In other words, take advantage of everything you have available. So when we wanted to revise vocabulary, just before a test, instead of using and doing the games that were on the interactive whiteboard, we played the games with fly swatters. To put it very simply, I just had some slips of paper with the vocabulary that I wanted to revise. I called out the words, and the students had to hit with the fly swatters either the synonym or the antonym. And it was very fun, it was very engaging, it was very quick. It's even better if you divide your students in groups, because then it gets more competitive. Another day, I wanted to revise articles, so I turned a traditional Jenga game into a revision lesson for the articles. So basically, I wrote different words on Jenga blocks, and I used the dice. So according to what was on the dice, the students had to take out a block, a brick, sorry, a Jenga brick, with a word that would go with the, and, or whatever. So they worked all together because, of course, their aim was to get the right brick, but at the same time, they should keep the brick, the tower up still as for as long as possible. So it was very fun, it was very engaging, and I'm sure that we did much more revision than what we have done if we had the exercises on the whiteboard. Now, the other issue is that sometimes it's not just enough to anticipate the problem. It's how to turn this problem into a new pedagogical opportunity. So, and here comes rule number 2. Oops. Yes. When life gives you lemons, just make lemonade. So, in other words, during the years of financial crisis in Greece, there were many students who came in my classroom and complained that they had no computers, or the computers had just broken down and they didn't have enough money, they couldn't afford to repair their computers. In some cases, they didn't have a printer, or they couldn't afford buying ink for their printers. So what should I do? Should I leave? Should I let the opportunity to do a research go? No, I just turn to the more traditional ways, the ones that we used to have when we were students. So I encourage my students to find information in books and dictionaries, and do their newsletter handwriting. So what was the good thing about it? The students stayed focused and worked more efficiently because they weren't distracted working on the internet. And we know how distracted that can be even for adults, not to mention teenagers. And they also got all the benefits which are supposed to be attributed when using printed dictionaries and books. So the most important thing was that my students could see the results of their creativity, could see their own handwriting, could see their own image pictures, and they were very happy because it was something even more personal. And then I realized that sometimes we have to leave technology out of our classrooms, not because there's a problem, but it's just a matter of choice. So instead of spoon feeding my students with pre-made notes photocopied for them, I realized I could just encourage them to keep notes while we are talking about an issue that then they would have to analyze into an essay. So what was the result? What was the benefit of this was that as they were keeping their own notes, they understand and process more information and on a deeper level. At the same time, their focus was increased and their memory was improved because they had to remember all this information in order to put it down in their essay. And last but not least, their critical thinking was improved because apparently they couldn't remember at home all the information, and they couldn't keep notes of everything that was said. So they had to distinguish between what was essential and were just the comments and the details of what they have heard. So recently we keep talking about the square age generation and how much time our young students spend in front of a screen. Teachers complain, parents complain, psychologists are worried about this. So I think that what we have to do as educators is to help our students redefine their relation with technology. And in other words, leaving technology out of our teaching doesn't have necessarily to be because of low resource facilities. It could just be a new perspective and a new attitude, another attitude towards our teaching. It has to do with teachers' willingness to be more creative and think outside the digital box. In any case, we should be, as teachers, very confident about our subject knowledge and make the best effort for our students' benefit. Thank you so much.